The garden. Pop's always told me better planted than planned, and he was a good planner, but what he's trying to say is it's really my deal today. Let's just stop it. Welcome, and today we're talking about planting the garden. And as Pop's always said, a garden is better planted than planned. So you can be good at planning your garden, but eventually you just got to get out and get it planted. You don't have to worry about being perfect about every little thing. It's just time to get it in. As you can see here, I have a rototiller. You don't need one, but I have one, so I used it to till everything. You can hire someone to rototill it for you. Once the tiller is done, the ground's really rough. I like to give it a quick rake. I'm not trying to make it perfect, I'm just trying to get the big lumps down. So I like a metal rake, and I just lean ahead and I just lightly pull it towards me. I'm not trying to make it perfect, I'm just trying to rake it down. You can play with that a little bit. If you don't feel like you have a rake, you can use your shovel to level this as well. So I have this garden all raked down, and I went and stuck stakes on each end. I put them a foot apart. That's a little closer than I like, but for this small of a garden, if you want a lot of vegetables, you can do that. If you want to get them 2 feet apart, that works well too. A tape measure works good, or you can just walk it off, measure with your feet. To mark the rows, you can see I just use sticks because I have plenty of trees out here. You can go buy stakes. I've seen people take forks and stick them in the ground upside down and then put a card in the fork. You can get really fancy and get a piece of wood and write on there what you're planting and put it on your stake. I like to keep things simple. Once you get your stake set up, you just push your stake in the ground. If you want to, you can run a string from stake to stake, and then you know where your rows are at. And it's not so much about being perfect, it's about knowing where things are at when you come back out to weed them. I don't normally use string, but I just set this up for an example. The first row I'm going to put in here are tomatoes. And all of our plants, our tomato plants, our pepper plants, the cabbages, the herbs, we're going to plant those pretty much exactly the same way. And so I like most of my plants about 2 feet apart because they are going to get bigger and bushier. And the next video I'll show you how we can maintain tomato plants so they're easier to work with. But for today we're going to get them in the ground. So I made a mark every 2 feet apart, and I'm going to take my shovel, same trusty shovel we used to dig up the garden. And I'm going to dig that. I'm going to push that down, which feels about like a half a foot, 4 inches or so, half a foot. And I'm going to dig that one, and then I have one marked at the beginning of the row. And my soil's really soft, so that's going to dig out really easily. So I'm just going to put my shovel in the ground, and then we have our 4-packs, and you can see I already have 2 of them planted. All I'm going to do is push a little bit on this bottom here and lightly pull this tomato plant out so I don't wreck it. When you look at it, you're going to see really nice roots in there. This looks short. I actually kind of like them a little smaller like this when I plant them. If it's bigger, that's okay. And I'm just going to come down here, and basically I want this to be planted that deep. So just the plant. And you'll notice that when I plant this, I'll just push that soil down a little bit. You'll notice when I plant this, there's just a little bit of a divot there. And I like that with tomatoes and all my other plants, because then when I water these individually, that'll help to hold the water in. And again, I'll show you how to manage this soil when it's time to water. So if I would put a pepper plant in the ground, it's the same thing. I just take my package, pull this out, and there we are. My next row here, I'm going to plant seeds, and what I'm going to plant are my my radishes and lettuce. And I'm going to plant half the row in radishes and then the second half in lettuce. And then the next row over, I'm going to plant my peppers, because my tomatoes are going to get big and my peppers are going to get big. By the time they start growing, these will be ready to harvest. And by the time they're big enough, this row will actually be, all the radishes and lettuce will be gone, and that'll be good space for them. You can use your shovel to make your rows, or if you want to buy a garden hoe, you can do that. But this shovel can be used to manage weeds as well, so you don't need to buy a lot of different products. So if you have your line set up, that's good. If you don't, you have to use your imaginary line. And I'm just going to take this edge of the shovel and push it down in there. And with radishes and lettuce, you see I'm just pushing lightly into the soil, and I'm not making a very deep hole at all. This here is a garden hoe, and you can do the same thing with the garden hoe. You can just drag that along the ground as well. Either works perfectly fine. Kind of windy, so my lettuce blew away. Here it is. So I'm just going to take my radish seeds and dump them in my hand like this. And you'll see that there's not a lot in there. So I'm just going to watch so I don't wreck my tomatoes. And I'm going to pinch this. And I'm going to just roll them out of my fingers, kind of like if you are putting salt and sugar on your food. And some of these are going to look like there's too many in a spot and some not enough. Don't let that worry you. And you can see that I had just a small amount of seeds in my hand, but this has actually given me a long row of seeds. So if you remember, the radish seeds are about a ½ inch deep, so that's how deep we're going to plant these. Okay, and then the rest of my row I have for lettuce. And lettuce seeds are really light, so I'm going to put those in my hand. And this is several different types of lettuce. And so again, I'm just going to pinch it, and I'm going to lightly put those in the soil. Once I have all my lettuce in, I'm just going to take my hand and push the dirt over it. And if you get out your little tape measure and measure, I dug about a ½ inch hole, and so they're going to be about a ½ inch deep, so that's right where they need to be. Sometimes I like to just push just a little bit, and that makes sure that the soil pushes down around the seeds. And there you go, those are planted. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to plant the beans. It's basically the same as what we did with the radish and the lettuce. We're just going to make a deeper hole. So here I have the garden hoe. You can use your shovel. I'm going to dig down deep. And if you look at my tape measure, that's about 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to plant the bean seeds here because the beans and the peas are going to be planted the same way. Just dump a bunch in my hand, and then I'm just going to take and drop them along the way. Some of them might be almost right on top of each other, and you're going to have little spaces. If you want to go back, you can do that, but just get them spaced out like this. And remember, planted is better than perfect. Just as long as we get them in the ground. Once this whole row is done, then I'm just going to shove the dirt back in like I did the other ones. And if you want to push down on it a little bit, that'll help as well. I do have some, I do have some onions. These are the onion plants that I showed you. You notice that these are purple up to about there. So with the onions, we're going to want to plant them about halfway up. So this is an example of how we put the onions in the ground. We put them in about that deep, plant them. With the onions, it's important that you just pack it down a little bit. I'd like to just stick my finger in there, and I plant them about palms width apart. And that's actually going to start to be pretty close once they start growing their own size. So you want them about 3 to 4 inches apart, or about 5 to 6 inches apart. So that small packet of onions I had, you can get a long line of onions planted in your garden. And then that last thing I'm going to show you is how to plant potato plants. The last thing I'm going to show you how to plant are potatoes. And remember, we took these potatoes and we cut the eyes out. You can do that 3-4 days ahead of time, and by the time you get to planting them, they're going to be really brown. just like when you make potatoes at home and they get brown, and they're gonna look ugly and terrible, and that's fine, you can still plant them. What we're more worried about is that eye is still good, and it will be. So here you see I started some holes. I'm just gonna show you how to dig a hole. When you see me dig this, you're gonna see it's the same as what we did for the tomatoes and the pepper plants. So I'm gonna dig my hole so that way I can plant these about 3 to 4 inches deep. And so in this case, I'm gonna take my potatoes. I'm gonna put my potatoes in there. And I'm gonna put that right in the soil. And then I'm going to I like to just use my feet, just push the soil over it, and I just give it a light stomp. Potatoes like the ground just a little bit more firm. And there we go. So these are some examples of how to set up the garden and get these things planted. The next video I show you, I'll have this garden planted, and I'll show you how we can maintain it by watering it, keeping the weeds down, and taking care of pests. Thank you.